First story. The Echoes of Wyndham. I remember the first time I saw the Wyndham Asylum. The building loomed over the dead grass and cracked pavement like a skeletal giant, its windows shattered, its walls discolored with time. I had come to this forsaken place on a dare, my friends laughing as they pushed me toward the rusted gate. It groaned as I forced it open, stepping into the darkness beyond. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something more rotten. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the main hallway, my footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. The asylum had been abandoned for over 50 years after a fire gutted the East Wing, killing dozens of patients and staff. They said the place was cursed, that those who entered never left the same. But I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. That changed when I saw her. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. A shadow moved at the end of the hallway, darting into a patient's room. My breath caught, but I forced myself forward, peering inside. The room was empty, save for an overturned cot and decaying walls smeared with old brown stains. But as I turned to leave, a whisper brushed my ear. "Help me." I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. My breath misted in the cold air, and the room suddenly felt smaller, pressing in on me. I stumbled backward, slamming into the hallway wall, my flashlight shaking in my grip. And then I saw her. She stood at the end of the corridor, barely illuminated by the weak beam of my light. A girl, no older than 16, in a tattered hospital gown. Her long black hair draped over her face, hiding her features, but I could see the way her shoulders trembled. She took a step toward me, bare feet silent on the tile. "Please," she whispered again, her voice broken, desperate. Every instinct told me to run, but something in her voice held me in place. She wasn't a threat. She was afraid. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She lifted her head slightly, revealing hollow eyes, dark, endless voids that reflected nothing. "I don't remember," she said, and then the walls trembled with a deafening scream. The air turned frigid, the lights overhead flickering wildly. I stumbled back as shadows poured from the room, twisting and writhing like living things. The girl clutched her head, shaking violently, her mouth opening in a silent cry. I ran. I bolted through the halls, my footsteps pounding against the tile as the shadows chased me, whispering in voices I couldn't understand. I reached the entrance, my fingers scraping at the rusted door handle. And then everything went still. The air warmed, the whispers faded, and when I turned around, the girl was gone. The asylum was silent, as if nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I left that night, swearing never to return. But Wyndham Asylum wasn't done with me. In the days that followed, I heard her voice in my dreams. I saw her reflection in dark windows, standing just behind me. I felt the cold touch of her fingers at night, just before I woke gasping for air. And then one night I opened my eyes, and she was there, standing at the foot of my bed. "Help me," she whispered again. And this time, I couldn't run. Third story. The Echoes of Wyndham. I never should have taken that job. But I was desperate, and Wyndham Asylum had been abandoned for nearly 30 years. Who would have thought anyone would care? It was just a security gig, a paycheck to keep the lights on. That's what I told myself. The first night was easy. A flashlight, a radio, a thermos of coffee, standard night shift protocol. I walked the halls, the decay thick in the air. Paint peeled like dead skin, and the silence was heavier than it should have been. But it was just an old hospital, right? By the second night, the unease set in. The security monitors flickered, static dancing in rhythmic pulses. Doors creaked open without a draft, and the worst part, the whispers. Not words, just the rustling breath of something unseen. I convinced myself it was the wind. Then, the third night came. The night I learned the truth. At 2:13 a.m., the power flickered, and the monitors went dark. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could switch it on, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned. Down the hall, just past the nurse's station, stood a figure. No, several. Their outlines were blurred, their faces shifting like static on an old TV. My breath hitched, and I stepped back. The figures mimicked me. A step forward, I retreated. They followed. My radio crackled to life, a voice distant and broken. Don't let them see you. Run. I ran, through corridors that twisted in ways they hadn't before. Doors slammed where there had been none. I found myself in the basement, the air thick with mildew and something else, something rancid. A single bulb flickered overhead. My shadow stretched long on the floor, but it wasn't alone. A second shadow stood behind me, closer than it should have been. I turned. Nothing. Then the hands grabbed me, fingers like ice, pulling, dragging. I screamed, but my voice came out distorted, like it didn't belong to me. The darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up in a hospital bed, IVs strapped to my arm. The room was sterile, white, but the walls, they pulsed, shifting in and out of focus. A doctor approached. I recognized his face. From the security footage, "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his eyes too dark, too empty. "No one leaves Wyndham." I tried to move. I couldn't. The machines beeped faster. The walls began to close in. Then I understood. I was never a guard. I was always a patient. And Wyndham never lets its patients go. Second story. The echoes of Wyndham. I woke up to the sharp scent of antiseptic and the distant hum of flickering fluorescent lights. My head pounded as I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt impossibly heavy. The room was unfamiliar. A sterile hospital room with peeling beige walls and an outdated heart monitor beeping steadily beside me. A single, cracked window let in the dim glow of a street lamp. I had no memory of how I got here. The last thing I recalled was driving down a lonely stretch of highway outside Wyndham, Maine. A deer had darted across the road. I swerved, and then nothing. Yet, my body bore no signs of an accident. No bruises, no cuts. I pressed the call button for a nurse. No one came. The hospital was eerily silent. No distant chatter of staff, no rolling carts or overhead announcements. Even the heart monitor's beeping seemed swallowed by the oppressive stillness. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my bare feet meeting the icy linoleum floor. The pain in my head flared as I pushed myself up. The hallway outside my room was dimly lit, long and desolate. Empty wheelchairs sat abandoned along the walls. A patient gown dangled from a gurney, crumpled and stained. Then, the whispering began. Soft at first, a distant murmuring of voices just beyond comprehension. It grew louder, surrounding me, slithering into my ears from nowhere. I spun around, but there was no one there. A rusted sign above the nurse's station read, "Wyndham Memorial Hospital." I had never heard of it. The walls were lined with outdated medical charts and framed photos of long-dead doctors, their black and white eyes hollow and staring. I stumbled down the hallway, my breath quickening. Every room I passed was empty, beds neatly made as if no one had ever occupied them. The only sign of life was a single flickering security monitor. On the grainy screen, I saw myself standing at the end of the hallway. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, a figure loomed, just out of the monitor's frame. A tall, gaunt shadow with elongated fingers and hollow black eyes. Its head twitched unnaturally as it inched closer. I turned, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. A metallic clang echoed through the corridor. I ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor, past empty rooms and abandoned nurse stations. The exit sign flickered at the end of the hall. I reached it, yanking at the handle, locked. Then the lights went out. A deep, guttural breath sounded behind me. Cold fingers brushed my shoulder. I whirled around, and for the first time I saw it. A towering figure of decayed flesh, hospital scrubs hanging from its skeletal frame. Its jaw unhinged, releasing a sound that wasn't human. I screamed and staggered back. The door behind me suddenly swung open, and I fell through, landing hard on a blood-stained operating table. The room was filled with figures in tattered white coats. Their faces were obscured by surgical masks stained brown with old blood. One held a rusted scalpel. Another adjusted a flickering overhead light. "He's ready," one of them rasped. Cold restraints snapped around my wrists and ankles. I thrashed, but they held me down with unnatural strength. The figure with the scalpel leaned in, its mask slipping just enough to reveal a lipless grin. "Wyndham takes care of its own," it whispered. The scalpel pressed against my skin, and then everything went dark. I woke up to the sharp scent of antiseptic and the distant hum of flickering fluorescent lights. I was back in the bed. The room was the same. The beeping heart monitor was steady. But this time, when I looked at the cracked window, my own reflection was missing.